Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read S55042 Magic Treehouse number 2026. Good morning, Gorilla. Chapter 1 Dark and Rainy. Tap, tap, tap. Jack sat up in bed. Rain tapped against his window. His clock said 5 a.m. It was still dark outside. Annie peeked into his room. Are you awake? She whispered. Yep, said Jack. Ready to find some special magic? She asked. Maybe we should wait, said Jack. It's so dark and rainy. No waiting, said Annie. I'll get an umbrella. You bring a flashlight. Meet you downstairs. Okay, said Jack. He jumped out of bed, he pulled on his clothes, and put on a jacket. He pulled on his clothes, put on it, then he grabbed his backpack and flashlight. Jack slipped downstairs and out the front door. And he stood on the porch in jeans and a t-shirt. The air was chilly and breezy. Don't you need a sweater or something? Said Jack. I'm okay, she said. Let's go. Annie raised the umbrella. Jack turned on the flashlight. They followed a circle of rainy light down the street into the woods. They headed through the Frog Creek woods. The flashlight lit up the trees, the wet leaves and dark branches. Then it shined on a dangling rope ladder. Jack raised the flashlight beam. There it is, he said. Circle of light lit the magic tree house. Morgan is not there, said Annie. I can tell. Maybe she left us a message, said Jack. Jack, he grabbed the rope ladder and started up. Annie put the umbrella down and followed. When they climbed inside, Jack shined the flashlight around the treehouse. Morgan Le Fay wasn't there, but the squirrels from the trip to Old England were. Here's proof. We found the special magic yesterday, she said. Yeah, said Jack, smiling. Theater magic. He had great memories of acting in a play by their friend William Shakespeare. Did Morgan leave us a new secret rhymes? Asked Jack. He shined the flashlight on a book lying under the window. A piece of paper was sticking out of the book. Yes, said Annie. She picked up the book and pulled out the paper. Jack shined his light on the paper while Annie read aloud. Dear Annie and Jack, good luck on your second journey to find the special magic. The secret rhyme will guide you to find a special kind of magic. In words so far apart, speak a special language. Talk with your hands and heart. Thank you, Morgan. What kind of language does she mean? Jack asked. I guess we'll find out, said Annie. Where are we going? Jack shined the flashlight on the cover of the book. It showed huge trees partly hidden by mist. The title was An African Rainforest. Rainforest? Said Jack. Good thing we brought our umbrella and flashlight. Remember the rain in the Amazon rainforest? Remember how dark it was under the treetops? Yeah, said Annie. Remember the spiders and scary ants? Well, Jack said, not all rainforests have the same bugs. Remember the river snakes, said Annie, and the crocodiles? Well, said Jack, not all rainforests have big rivers. There are different kinds of rainforests, you know. Right, said Annie. She pointed to the cover of the book. I wish we could go there. The wind started to blow. Oh, remember the jaguar, said Annie, and the vampire bats. Wait, said Jack. But it was too late. The wind was blowing harder. Treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Chapter 2 Cloud forest. Jack opened his eyes. I can't tell what kind of rainforest this is, said Annie. She stared out the window. Jack looked out too. It seemed to be daytime, but he couldn't see much of anything. The quiet forest was covered with fog. Jack opened the research book and read. The misty rainforest in the mountains of Central Africa is called the cloud forest. Oh, I get it, said Annie. We're up so high, it's like we are in a cloud. Cool, said Jack. He pulled out his notebook and wrote Cloud Forest. Rainforest high up in mountains. Then he read more. The African cloud forest is home to many animals, including elephants, water buffaloes, black leopards. Jack looked up. Black leopards? He said. Don't worry, said Annie. Jack cleared his throat and kept reading. Antelopes, wild hogs, and gorillas. Gorillas, said Annie. Don't worry, said Jack. I'm not worried. I love gorillas, said Annie. They are totally great. I don't know about that, said Jack. He pictured huge apes pounding their chests. I like to study them, though. Write down their habits and behavior, just like a real scientist. Whatever, said Annie. Let's just go. This will be a fun adventure. She took off down the ladder. Jack threw his notebook, the research book, and the flashlight into his pack. He hooked the umbrella over his arm. Then he followed Annie. When they stepped onto the ground, Jack could see better. The fog had turned into a fine mist. Jack and Annie started through the cloud forest. They walked around huge trees, draped with moss. They pushed past tall shrubs and leafy plants. Wow, look at that tree, said Annie. She pointed to a fat tree. It had wide lower limbs, padded with thick cushions of moss. It looks like a piece of furniture, said Annie. Like an armchair. Yeah, said Jack. I better draw it. He put the umbrella on the ground. He pulled a flashlight out of his pack and put it next to the umbrella. Then he took out his notebook and pencil. As Annie walked ahead, Jack started to draw a simple picture of the fat tree. Hey, Jack, Annie called in a whispery voice. Come here, quick. Jack grabbed his pack. He moved around the tree and caught up with Annie. Listen, she said. Jack heard branches snap. Crack, a leopard, he wondered. Crack, crack. Jack nervously looked around the forest. Maybe we should go back up to the tree house, he said. We could read a little more and learn a little more. Annie didn't answer. Jack turned to her. She was grinning from ear to ear. As she stared into the bushes, Jack followed her gaze. A dark, shaggy little head was peeking out from a cluster of leaves. Boo Boo, a small gorilla asked. Chapter 3. Boo Boo. The gorilla's fur was very black against the green leaves. She had large nostrils and small ears. Her bright brown eyes were full of mischief. Boo, 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 she said. Boo, boo. Boo, boo, yourself, said Annie. The gorillas hid behind the leaves again. Then she poked her head out. Peekaboo, said Annie. The gorilla clapped her hands together. She stuck out her tongue. Jack and Annie both laughed. Boo, 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 the gorilla said. Then she bounded away through the misty forest. Hey, Boo Boo, don't leave us, Annie called. Jack rolled his eyes. Don't name her Boo Boo, he said to Annie. You don't have to. Wait, Boo Boo, Annie shouted. She took off after the small gorilla. Turn every animal into your best friend, Jack finished. He shook his head. Then he made a list in his notebook. Gorilla behavior. Plays peekaboo. Claps and sticks out tongue. As he wrote, Jack heard Annie laughing. But then he heard high shrieks. He caught his breath. A leopard? He wondered. Carrying his notebook, Jack hurried in the direction of the noise. He found Annie and the small gorilla perched in two trees. What's wrong? Said Jack, standing beneath the trees. Nothing, called Annie. We're just playing. The small gorilla screeched again. Then she scratched her head and hiccuped. Annie screeched too. She scratched her head and hiccuped. While they played, Jack studied the gorilla a bit more. He noticed she was about the size of a 3-year-old kid. Her fingers looked like human fingers. They even had fingernails. He made a few lists. Young gorilla, size of a 3-year-old, fingers like human fingernail. Jack heard the tree leaves shaking. He looked up. Annie and the gorilla had both climbed higher. Hey, calm down, Annie, Jack called. You might fall. Plus, it's getting dark. Jack looked around. Light was fading quickly from the forest. Is night falling? He wondered, or is a storm coming? A small gorilla screeched again and climbed even higher. Hey, Boo Boo, where you going? Said Annie. She climbed even higher too. That's enough, Annie. Come down now, said Jack. I'm serious. To his relief, the gorilla settled on a branch. Annie did the same. The gorilla broke off a piece of tree bark. She nibbled it like a candy bar. Annie broke off a piece of bark. She nibbled it like a candy bar too. The gorilla threw down her bark. She grabbed the tree branch and swung to another tree. Don't try it, Annie, shouted Jack, but his warning came too late. Annie threw down her bark. She grabbed the tree branch and tried to swing to another tree. Annie didn't swing like a gorilla. She fell from the tree and crashed down to the ground near Jack. Annie, he cried. Chapter 4. Nightmare. Jack knelt beside Annie. She was gasping for breath. The gorilla bounded down the tree and over to Annie. She bit her lower lip as if she were worried. Are you okay? Jack asked Annie. Yes. Annie panted. Just got the breath knocked out of me. Wiggle your arms and your legs, said Jack. Annie wiggled her arms and her legs. Good, nothing's broken, said Jack just then. He felt a drop of water hit his arm. The mist had turned to rain. Uh-oh, said Jack. He threw his notebook into his pack. I better get our umbrella and flashlight, he said. I left them near the tree that looked like a chair. I'll come too, said Annie. She started to sit up. No, catch your breath, said Jack. It's not far. I'll be right back. He took off his jacket and draped it over her. This will help you stay dry, he said. He pulled on his pack and stood up. The gorilla screeched. Stay with Annie, said Jack. Then he dashed back through the cloud forest. He looked for the fat tree where the wide limbs padded with moss. As he peered through the growing darkness, Jack saw many fat trees. He saw many limbs padded with moss. Soon he could hardly see trees at all. He realized that both a storm and night had come to the forest. Forget the umbrella and flashlight, he thought. It was more important to get back to Annie before it was too dark. They could wait together for daylight. As Jack started back to Annie, he could hardly see. He didn't know which way to go. Annie, boo-boo, he shouted. He felt silly shouting. Boo-boo, but he didn't know what else to call the small gorilla. Jack put out his hand. He moved slowly through the dark, rainy forest. He kept calling for Annie and Boo Boo. He listened for them, but he couldn't hear anything above the loud patter of the rain. Ah, he shouted. He had run into something that felt like a ball of spider webs. As he jumped back, he slipped and fell in the mud. He crawled over to a tree and huddled between two of its giant roots. I'd just wait here until morning, he thought. Then I'll find Annie. Or she'll find me, as rain dripped all around him. Jack wondered if leopards came out at night. He quickly pushed the thought away. He tried to think about morning and finding Annie and going home. He was really ready to go home. Why did Morgan even send us to the cloud forest, he wondered. He tried to remember the secret rhyme. To find the special magic, he whispered. He couldn't remember the rest. He felt tired and miserable. He took his backpack off and rested his head on it. He closed his eyes. To find the special magic, he mumbled. But he couldn't find the magic. He couldn't even find the words that finished the rhyme. Worst of all, he couldn't find any. Their fun adventure in the cloud forest had turned into a nightmare. Chapter 5, Silverback. Jack felt something tugging on his sleeve. He opened his eyes. Boo Boo, the small gorilla, was staring at him in the dawn light. Jack stood up. His arms and legs felt stiff and achy. His wet clothes stuck to his skin. He looked around the cloud forest. Misty sunlight shined through the tree branches. "Where is Annie?" he asked the small gorilla. Boo Boo waved her arms. Then she bounded off between the trees. Jack pulled on his pack and followed, as a small gorilla led him through the cloud forest. Her head bobbed above the leafy plants. Finally, she stopped before a row of shrubs. Jack took a few steps forward and peered over the shrubs. "Oh man," he whispered, large dark figures were sleeping in an open grassy area. Gorillas. There were at least 10 of them. Some slept on their backs. Some slept on their bellies. The gorillas were all sizes. The smallest was a baby sleeping in its mother's arm. The biggest was a giant with a black and silver fur. Jack pulled the book out of his pack. He found a chapter on gorillas and read, "Mountain gorillas live together in family. The leader of the family is a large male called a silverback. Because he has a silver fur on his back and shoulders, the gorillas do not hunt other animals. They mainly eat the plant growth of the forest. They are known to be shy and gentle giants." "Shy and gentle giant?" Jack repeated. That sounded good. He peered over the shrubs again. Boo Boo waved at him. She was standing at the far edge of the clearing. She pointed to something in the tall grass. Annie was fast asleep in the grass. Jack didn't know what to do. If he called her name, the gorillas would wake up. He had only one choice. He had to sneak over to her. Jack put his book in his pack. He pushed past the shrubs and stepped into the clearing. His heart was pounding. He thought of the words from the book, "Shy and gentle giant." As he started toward Annie, he heard a grunt. The giant gorilla with silver fur opened his eyes. When the gorilla saw Jack, he sat up. Jack stopped in his tracks. The gorilla just glared. This giant did not seem shy or gentle at all. Jack saw a stick lying on the ground. He picked it up just in case. Jack's stick made the gorilla growl. He stood up. He was very tall and very wide. Jack dropped his stick. Boo Boo ran and hid behind the tree. The silverback growled again. His long, shaggy arms touched the ground. His fingers curled under. Walking on his knuckles, he stepped towards Jack. Jack stepped back. The gorilla stepped forward. Jack stepped back again. The gorilla kept stepping forward. Jack kept stepping back until he had stepped out of the clearing. But the silverback kept coming. Jack stumbled back through the brush until he came to a thick wall of plants. The gorilla kept coming. Jack couldn't move back anymore. "Oh, hi," he said nervously. He held up his hand. "I come in." Before Jack could say peace, the giant gorilla went crazy. He hooted and leaped to his feet. Jack crouched down in a panic. The gorilla kept hooting. He grabbed the tree limb. He shook it wildly. He ripped leaves from branches. He gnashed his teeth. He cupped his hand. He beat his chest. "Rah!" he roared. "Rah!" The gorilla dropped on all fours. He charged back and forth past Jack. Then he threw himself on his belly. He began bashing the ground with his palms. He bashed and bashed and bashed. Jack scrambled on his hands and knees over to a tree. He hid behind the trunk, hugging his head. He waited for the maniac gorilla to find him and tear him to pieces. The end.